putting the foundation in.
Meetings being broadcast on local cable TV and recorded for rebroadcast on the local cable channels and on Newbury. I've held cable meetings. I've had Matt, and he's going to continue that discussion on that. I think, so then I think we can have an announcement that we use I'm going to limit the Northeast Mosquito Control and Wetlands Management District is conducting ULD application of the identified Geneva E4 ICU to control the mosquitoes in Newbury, Westonbury, and Groveland. In Newbury today, between the hours of 7:15 and 9 p.m. The areas you can go on the town website to see them, but basically the areas are down sort of Indian Hill areas on the reservoir, and also encompassing also Highfield and Groveland. And there's way more information about this particular insecticide and control of the cat mosquito, and I recommend that you read go on the website and read this and while we're doing this, obviously we can read more news, which is a regional report that people are being affected.
Mosquitoes carrying AAA, not necessarily people infected.
Right, mosquitoes, exactly. Not Ian Weston, right?
Yep.
So, next item on the agenda is we have a generous donation that for the car post gift account from John McGrath, and I would make a motion that we accept this gift to the Card Post Building gift account, which was created last month.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye.
And we actually had an additional gift that just came in earlier today, so we didn't get a chance to connect, but...
Well, this is outstanding. So we have an additional gift from Catherine Gove, a longtime resident, everyone is quite familiar with, and make a motion that we accept this gift also for the Car Post gift account.
The amount.
In the amount of $1,000.
How much was John McGrath's?
His was in the amount of $3,000.
I'll second. Motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
So, back to the grids.
And if I could, I'll kind of frame the discussion a bit. So I think everyone's aware that we've been kind of hard at work with the Historic Preservation Architectural team. As they'll go into in their presentation, they have a number of other specialists on their team, engineers and structural engineers and so forth. The objective that I've had is basically to make sure that the voters have the decision of what happens with the building. So there's been a lot of attention paid to the building over years, but I don't believe until this current effort that there's been a presentation of kind of a true cost to restore the building. So there's a lot of great work that's been done. And I want to say for the Board of Selectmen, I am going to be asking for your support tonight to submit a CPC proposal. I see that as a support to continue the process. It's not necessarily the, that you're, where you stand on the specifics of the proposal. There's a lot of detail in here, there's a lot of line items, there's decisions that still lie ahead, but to meet the CPC calendar and to get something to the town meeting this November, we've got to keep the process moving. But I want to say for everyone in the public watching, we did just get updated cost information Friday afternoon. And so this will really be the first time the board's seeing that. So I just want to ensure that, we're really still in the mix of the process, even though there is a proposal in front of you. It's not the end-all, be-all. We've got a CPC process, and then followed by that, the selectmen closing the warrant, and the selectmen making a recommendation on the article itself. So I don't want you to think that tonight is your one bite at the apple, so to speak, in terms of looking at the scope of what's proposed. There would be a scenario where you provide support to submit the application and then continue to chew on the details in the coming weeks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a meeting just earlier this evening of the Car Post Building Committee, and so at that time, Lynn and Curtis presented their updated information. So I think that would be a good next step, and get into discussion. So for everybody in the room, this is a televised meeting, so if you give comments, we do need to ask you to go to the microphone, and Lynn and Curtis, you both have one. If you press this button, if your light is green, your microphone is picking up. If you want to silence it, you just press it, it'll turn red. There you go. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I'm Lynn Spencer. I'm the principal for historic preservation at my firm, which is Spencer, Sullivan and Vogt. We specialize in the restoration and rehabilitation of historic properties. We sometimes end up working on 20th century properties, and indeed, this is the building that was built in 1900. With me is Curtis Pound.
Nice to meet you. I'm a project manager for this project.
So, our firm first became acquainted with this building in 2013 when we were asked to do a conditions assessment on what has been known as the Car Post, but we think of it as the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Building, which is the inscription that is on the front of the building. Built in 1910, originally conceived of as a memorial to the Civil War, the Grand Army of the Republic, Grand Army of the Republic Post. It also eventually housed the public library for the town. When we saw it in 2013, it was in tough condition, and that's why we were brought in. We had a structural engineer, we had our expertise in historic buildings, and especially with masonry. And the town at that point decided to devote some money for emergency stabilization. So that was the Band-Aid, so to speak, to hold the building until today, when we have been asked again to, with the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Committee and Angus Jennings and others in the town, look at what it means to reclaim a cherished historic building and give it a new life. So that's what this presentation is about. Many people have driven by the building. They may not fully understand the condition of the building on the inside.
So it's a very friendly looking building as you approach it. It has a tower, it's a Gothic revival structure, but it's also showing the signs of age and a lot of deferred maintenance, as you can see in the photographs that we've presented here, which show the exterior and the interior of the tower, which is the part of the building that's really suffered the most. The tower originally had crenellations, which were removed as early as the 1960s. So the problems with the maintenance of the building were already beginning then, and they've slowly compounded over time. I'm just going to back up for a second. You can see some of the stabilization work that was done on the tower with the pins that are poking out of the building here. These were just meant as temporary supports to keep it from falling down. Because what's happened over time is water has infiltrated the brickwork and the structural stability has been compromised to the point that the walls of the tower are really sagging in a dangerous way. The floor, as you can see inside, has given way on the second floor. The interior has suffered a lot of degradation. There's mold. So we're actually proposing a complete reconstruction of the tower because that seems to be the most expeditious way to move forward with the conditions that are presenting. In terms of the rest of the interior, there were also some other structural issues with the roof that in 2014 were addressed with the stabilizations that you can see in the bottom two pictures here. These were added braces that were put in to remediate that condition. These are actually meant to be permanent, and they would have to become part of the design of whatever comes into the second floor as we move forward with the building. You can also see on the first floor, the top two pictures here, that the building shows a lot of signs of age. There's linoleum flooring and things are looking pretty worn out, and it just doesn't fit the standards of what we would expect for a building that's intended for civic use, which is, I think, the direction the town is heading.
A building that is not used is oftentimes a building that, I won't say is abused, but it's forgotten. So we are actually focusing on 4 objectives, 4 goals for this building. One is to preserve one of West Newbury's oldest civic buildings and a notable structure in its own right in terms of the design and the conception of that design, which was to serve as a monument and meeting space related to the Civil War, recalling the sacrifices that were made on the part of soldiers from West Newbury and the families who were left behind and were supported by them or not. So that association with what it means to make sacrifices and commitments to the country is an important part of what this building symbolizes. It is also possible to reclaim some meeting space, especially on the first floor of this building. As we saw in the previous photographs, the first floor had been used in recent years as the car post, a place for gathering for social and recreational purposes. It's approximately 1,200 square feet of space that could be put into use for meetings, events, and displays. What was interesting to us is that during the bicentennial celebration at the Old Town Hall, there was a survey that was where people were asked to give their opinion about what could happen with this building. And the ideas were consistent with what makes sense. You know, it's a meeting space. It could be a display space. It could be a place where, you know, lectures take place. It should be associated with recalling the commitments of service that is represented by Soldiers and Sailors Memorial. The second floor is a little bit more challenging in terms of use, but what makes sense is to consider using it for office space. So it could have limited but useful access. It could be used for perhaps some town offices that aren't otherwise covered, or possibly could be rented as space. Or perhaps nothing happens up there, but at least the first floor should be put into active use. So what does it mean to say, oh, okay, we're going to take a building that was built over 100 years ago and we're going to bring it up to standards of today in terms of the building code, life safety, zoning, and so on. So there's some things that need to be covered. We have about a 6-page regulatory analysis that has been boiled down into the bullet points that you see in front of you. A key one is what is shown in this graphic.
So we're looking at a plan that shows the wetlands that are adjacent to the building, and the building itself is marked in yellow here. And you can see that the building sits completely within what's known as the 100-foot wetlands buffer zone. Because of its proximity to the wetlands and the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act, any work that takes place in this zone is going to be very carefully regulated so that it doesn't have adverse effects on the environment. So the Conservation Commission will definitely be having a major role in what goes forward here.
Another part of the building code that we have become more and more aware of in these last 20 years is accessibility for all. What does that mean? It means that somebody who is disabled, who may be having, visual or hearing impairments, has the ability to be in this building and to use it properly. So the building code calls for accessibility being triggered when 30% of the assessed value of the building only occurs through a construction project. So that would really mean that because this building is assessed at a very low value, that automatically the whole building should be accessible. We are recommending that the site plan that was developed in conjunction with the development at the rear of the property, the residential development, the part of what was sort of worked out with the town was an agreement that a parking lot be built behind this building, and Curtis is showing the outline of that. That provides for 8 parking spaces. It is very logical, as we see on the initial engineering plan, for access from that parking area to occur to the rear entrance of this building, which would become the daily entrance of this building. In contrast, we are suggesting that the front entrance be seen as a ceremonial entrance, and that we seek a variance from the Architectural Access Board to preserve that entrance intact. And that's been an approach that we, as a firm, have used on other historic buildings that has proven to be acceptable. Another part of the building code has to do with what is called the level of alteration.
So in this case, we would be doing enough work that we would rise to what's known as a level 2, which is a reconfiguration of the interior space. And that would largely mean that the standards would need to comply with the code for new construction.
One question that had been raised by the building committee is whether there should be a sprinkler system. And by code, because this building is small, I mentioned earlier that it's 1,200 square feet on the first floor, 1,200 square feet on the second floor. So in all, it's 2,500 square feet of usable space. It technically does not require a sprinkler system, but that is something that could be elected to be done. Then we get on to occupancy.
So in terms of the occupancy, we can have a couple of different arrangements of how people would be on the first floor. The first would be the idea of loose seating with tables and chairs, and with that type of arrangement, you could fit 42 people. Then for a special event like a lecture or something along those lines, if you were to configure the seating as row seating, you might have up to 97 people in that space. And those would both be falling under the use category of assembly group A3. That category of occupancy requires 2 means of egress, and the first floor does satisfy that. For the second floor, we would be proposing a lift in the building that would allow people to move up and down in terms of handicap accessibility, but that doesn't come to the level of providing a second means of egress. But in the existing building code, which would cover this building, there is an exception for Group B business use in an existing building that allows an existing single path of egress to be the egress path without a second means of egress, as long as it's categorized as a business use. So this is why we would be proposing for the second floor an office use of the space, which would allow an occupancy of 8 people.
And then we've got the plumbing code, which basically has calculations which would result in one bathroom per gender, uh, for the building as a total. And we're assuming, the occupancy would sort of max out at 100 if we use that 97 and 8. So there's one bathroom per gender, both would be accessible. So let's just look back at what it means to make the building weather tight and structurally sound. With these diagrams, what you're seeing is we're putting forth the concept of carefully taking down the tower, saving the brick for reuse. We've got molded and quite nice brick on that tower that should be reused. It can be reconstructed. Windows get restored. We are suggesting an interior storm window for energy conservation. The entire exterior of the gable roof building would be repointed. Those of you who are familiar with the fact that on the side elevations near the top below the eaves bulges out slightly, but that structural stabilization that took place in 2014 has pulled in and stabilized that. So that can be repointed in place without taking down the walls and reconstructing it. The rear chimney needs to be, the top portion of it needs to be rebuilt, and the crenellation on the tower itself should be reconstructed. We have not only historic photographs, but we have actually tracked down the original drawings. So we have that as a good document to work with. One of the other big things that we are proposing here has to do with the rear elevation, where on the rear elevation there had been a wood fire escape that had been established, and a door opening created where there had been a window. Because we are limiting access on the second floor, only requiring a single form of egress, we are proposing to infill that opening and reestablish a window in that location. We also are proposing the novel idea of getting rid of, quite honestly, the largest poison ivy that we have seen in a long time. And apparently the town has already taken the first step on the death of that poison ivy, so that would be good. That's what that green shape is showing on the back of the building. What you don't see here, but would be an important step on the interior, is the idea of actually addressing what has been a long-standing and chronic water problem within the cellar by basically filling the cellar with flowable fill and putting in a concrete slab for the first floor with wood sleepers and ultimately a wood floor, which would enable you to meet the assembly code of 100 pounds per square foot, as well as dealing with, as we said, a long-standing chronic water problem. The inside of the building is a very simple plan as it is today, but as we think about the reuse and revitalization of this building, we think about what it means to take it to the next steps.
So the way the building is today, you enter through the front door into a small foyer, and then you come into the main assembly space. There are two very tiny bathrooms in the back and a little kitchen area. What we're proposing in the option that the committee has selected is shown here in black. The existing parts of the building that would remain are in gray, and the alterations are the darker black areas. The first major one is, as we've already mentioned, the complete reconstruction of the tower. The tower is really beyond the point where it can be worked with as an existing element, so we would be recreating that using the bricks that are there. One of the benefits of doing that is that currently the small passage that connects the tower room to the main space is very narrow. It's not much wider than 2 feet, so it doesn't meet any accessibility requirements. It's even kind of uncomfortable for anyone to pass through a corridor that narrow. So in our reconstruction of the tower, what we would propose is to reduce the width of the fireplace from what exists so that we can make this passage wide enough to meet accessibility requirements. It's not possible to get accessibility through this set of doors because there are steps going up and down that are part of the main stairway for the building. So the entire stairway would need to be redesigned, which would be a fundamental alteration of the character of the building. And it seems more feasible, since the tower work is already to be taking place, to go with the idea of changing the fireplace in order to provide the accessibility here. We would also be adding a lift to comply with the accessibility requirements to reach the second floor. And we've positioned the lift here so that, as you can see in these diagrams, that the shaftway for the lift will not project beyond the roof of the building. So there won't be any penetrations that will mar the exterior appearance of the building. And the lift can rise up into a space that currently is very hard to use. There's a small office on the second floor, but it has a sloping ceiling because it's under the eaves, so it's not really a very functional space. And we would be having the lift kind of enter into that space and moving the wall out slightly, so that now that space under the eaves, because the cellar will have been filled, this space becomes the new mechanical area for the building. So it gets the mechanical equipment out of the wet cellar where it's been suffering from the moisture all along, and puts it up into a drier area of the building where it will also be easier to maintain. The other major element of this plan is the addition of 2 handicap accessible bathrooms at the back of the building. So you have both a men and a women's toilet, and the main, for all intents and purposes, entrance to the building, which will be through the south or rear side and leading directly out to the parking lot, making use of the plan that we showed earlier that has already been developed in conjunction with the developer. Just for purposes of comparison and to show what else we've been doing, we had other options that we considered, and one of them was the idea of an addition out the back, which had been suggested by some of the feedback from the town. So we explored that option to see how it would work. This would be isolating all of the new elements in a new addition at the rear. One of the drawbacks of that addition is that it would completely conceal what is one of the more delightful aspects of the building, which is the lovely arrangement of windows on the rear facade. So that would go away, and instead you would have this addition on the back. We questioned whether it really gained very much to retrieve these bays that are currently occupied by the restrooms and the kitchenette that are in the building, because it's a small gain of space, and the costs of constructing the addition seem to outweigh the gain. Ultimately, the committee chose option 1.
So, what does all of this mean? We've just talked about a series of interior changes and renovations. And we talked about the exterior, but when we sort of summarize it all, what it means is, on the exterior of the building, we're looking at rebuilding the tower and the chimney top. We're repointing the entire exterior brickwork, and we're repairing the corners of the stone foundations that have just kicked out. Otherwise, that foundation is in very good condition. Granite steps were removed at some point. We'd like to see those restored at the facade. The slate roof actually is in remarkably good condition, given the integrity, given the fact that the major fields of the slate work are intact. What is needed is a new ridge cap, new copper ridge cap, and the gutters somehow in some time have been lost, but there should be gutters and downspouts that direct the roof drainage properly. A question was raised about whether it is timely to replace that slate roof in its entirety. The rule of thumb for slate roof replacement is if 20% of the slate roof is showing, deterioration, sliding slates, missing slates, and so on. you can say, yes, that's the time to take care of it. The fact is that when the slate roof was installed, it was likely installed with ferrous fasteners, and they will eventually rust. But we think that this roof is worth holding on to at this time. If you had lots of money to spend, you might do it now. Otherwise, you would actually work with the roof as it is. We can take the steps of having some slates removed and just taking a look at the fasteners. I mean, I think that's a prudent thing to look at doing. The roof, all the windows need to be restored, and we are adding interior storm windows. We are also going to be replacing that missing window and doing some repairs to doors. All the exterior paint work needs to be replaced or prepped and painted. A septic system is needed here, and the Board of Health has advised that a tight tank makes sense for this site, so we have included that in our budget, along with new utility lines, renewing the water lines and the sanitary line to the septic system. The accessible walkway from the new parking area needs to be installed, as well as appropriate signage. On the inside of the building, I'll reiterate, we're looking at refilling the basement or the cellar with flowable fill. That's basically lightweight concrete with a concrete slab and sleepers for the first floor with a new wood floor. There are some asbestos tiles that have been detected on the first floor that would need to be dealt with, but otherwise the report on hazardous materials is fortunately a good report. All the plaster work and ceilings and walls will be replaced. New kitchenette and handicap restrooms, paint the entire interior, do the flooring work, including refinishing the quite good floor on the second floor, installing the wheelchair lift between the first and second floor, and then all new systems, plumbing, electrical, and HVAC, along with a fire alarm system. On the matter of HVAC, the question was raised in the earlier session we had tonight about energy conservation. We do, as Angus mentioned at the beginning of this, we have a team working with us on this, structural engineer, civil engineer, and a firm that has an expertise in mechanical and electrical and plumbing. We will be looking at various HVAC options over the next period of time. We could be looking at something like heat pumps, which are a pretty economical way of approaching HVAC versus gas-fired systems and other alternatives. This is a building where keeping it as weather-tight and airtight as possible makes sense, but we also have to be mindful of the implications of insulation and the effects on brick and masonry when it's not properly either protected by an air barrier or ventilation. So that's kind of a big picture of what we'll be looking at next, which is a somewhat eye-crossing but a very important part of this presentation. I'm going to linger on this not too long because there's a summary that will come up next, but I want you to understand how we came up with cost estimates, because that is a critical part of this. We had three different approaches on this. One is that we brought in a restoration contractor who has a lot of experience with historic masonry, window restoration, and slate and copper work. And that firm gave us budget numbers for the purposes of this cost estimate, which is a cost estimate at a solid schematic design development, early design development level. We also asked our mechanical engineers, Wozni Barber and Associates, to give their recommendations on the electrical, plumbing, and HVAC options and the costs that we should be carrying for that. And lastly, we did a comparison with projects that we have had either under construction or just finished in construction in the public bid arena, where prevailing rates and filed sub-bidding and all that kind of procurement requirements come into effect. So that was another source for us in this cost estimating. So we've got things broken down by each task, each activity under the CSI category, as well as quantities and unit prices. So that's a complicated spreadsheet. Let's look at a simpler and more straightforward one. In this case, what we are seeing with this project is if we look at the comprehensive exterior work, the interior work, including the systems as well as the site work, we subtotal a construction budget which includes general conditions, overhead and profit, insurance, and bonds at just over $1,070,000. If we then prudently add in a design contingency of just under $54,000, a construction contingency at 10% of $107,000, and the architectural and engineering fees moving forward, we come up with a subtotal of just under $1.4 million. Now, we are showing below that subtotal additional items that were requested by the committee and in discussions, and that would include a sprinkler system, which would require a new water line, a separate water line coming into the building, just dedicated to that sprinkler system. So that could add, between the sprinkler system and the water line, could bring it to, $27,000. We'd also love to see the electrical service go underground. Right now it goes into the northeast corner of the building up front, and it'd be nice to see that underground. And if this was the time that everyone said, yes, we want a new slate roof, that could cost $117,000. So there's approximately $150,000 of items that could be added into this project, if that was desired, which would bring it to a $1,544,000 project. So I think there's a legitimate and real question about what does all this mean for the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Building? What are the options that are facing us? Well, one option is to do nothing and to continue to let it become, I suppose, a folly. A building clearly in decline, and it's on its way to being closer to nature than to architecture. That's one option. Another option is to do the entire project as we've outlined, as we understand it today with the information that we've had, in the time that we've had and the effort that we've been able to put into it, to pull together a project that says, this is a project that has a substantial budget, it reclaims a valued historic building, and it puts it into active use. And that could be a $1.4 million project. Alternatively, it may be possible to say, well, what if we don't do the work on the second floor, and we don't put in that vertical lift, and we don't do the work on the second floor? What does that do? Does it save us $150,000? Yes. That's the kind of magnitude that goes into. A last option is to simply do the exterior of the building in the way that commits to the reconstruction of the tower, the complete repointing, gets the windows done, stabilizes the foundation by doing the flowable fill, and perhaps bring the utilities into the building. So it'd be ready for the interior renovation. And that would be another option.
can you do that? Can you put the tower together without, you're gonna have to create the, stringers for the floors and whatever in the tower anyway, for example?
I think that when I said you would do the filling of the basement, I think you would do all that together. So you would, if you will, you'd go back to this and say, we are doing the exterior repointing, we're reconstructing the tower, we're filling in the basement, we're doing the windows, we're doing everything but and we're pulling in the utilities. So they may not be distributed, but they'd be in. That's one approach.
I have one sort of specific, maybe I shouldn't ask now, but I was curious about the windows. The repair of the window and then to put storms, to create new storms, and each window in that case is over $3,000. Would it be better to make a modern double pane window that matches that, rather than trying to repair what isn't in good shape already? Those are not, I've looked at them closely. They're worse when you look at them in real life than they are in the picture.
Yeah, certainly they require a dedicated conservation project. What we have found is that properly repaired a wood window with a storm window, it actually, when you look at the R values, exceeds the value of a thermal pane window. So that's one thing we would say about that. And that's something that we've done over and over again. That's why we took that approach here. We don't have enough thickness and width to easily do a thermal pane window with the way those lancet windows are formed. So we were taking, a practical approach based on our experience. There's always other ways of trying to do something.
Yeah, I also just wondered if it would be, which would be more cost effective.
Actually,
sometimes fixing something that's really in bad shape ends up being worse. Right,
but it's hard to make a new window with the wood that we have available, other than mahogany or Akoya, that will give you what you get out of old growth pine, which is what we have.
Okay.
So that would be my response on that.
Okay.
One thing we have talked about with the committee is, and we're doing a project now with North Bennett Street School in Boston, which has a preservation carpentry program, and they very often like the idea of doing window restoration and teaching their students how to do it. So that's one possibility of a collaboration. The other was working with a local technical school, the carpentry program in the local technical school. You wouldn't maybe do all the windows, but you'd have a project where one or two windows go out.
And that can lower the cost.
And that will lower the cost. The North Bennett Street program right now is looking at doing a project with us that is about $400,000 worth of work, and their charge to the project is really the cost of materials. So it could be a very valued kind of partnership.
So, looking at the windows, I looked at them, but not in super detail. You mentioned that it's old growth pine, and that it's a long-lasting wood, and I'm familiar with that from having seen siding on very old buildings that surprisingly was old growth pine, 200+ years old. But are they still really sound pretty much everywhere? The base material?
We've looked at them, and we've seen, I hate to say it, I've seen a lot worse.
Yeah.
These are very retrievable windows. I mean, we have some areas where in the upper portion, the pointed arch portion, where we've got those delicate lancet windows where there's a piece or two missing. But I have to say I was surprised at how good they were in a relative sense. That's relative. We did a project 2 years ago in Lancaster, Massachusetts, on a building that was a 3-story, turn-of-the-century brick school building with original windows. And we did a thorough window restoration project on that building. And that involved something like 42 double hung, 6/6. Actually, they were 8/8 windows. So, can be done.
Yeah.
I think, quite honestly, the big challenge on this building is the reconstruction of the tower. If you look at that and look at the detail on that, that's where some real good mason's time is going to be spent.
A question that's borderline heretical, I guess. Fireplace.
Mm-hmm.
Do we envision the fireplace will actually ever be used?
I would say that it's more of an attractive relic, quite honestly. It's not something we would advise using, and it doesn't actually look like it ever was used.
So, is there any way taking that into account? Is there a way to reduce the cost of rebuilding that facade? Because it's essentially a facade.
And build it without the fireplace?
Or
I mean, you're going to need...
Or maybe have a fireplace, but not really have a chimney that is anything other than a column of brick.
There is no chimney.
There is no chimney. So that's why I'm saying the fireplace is more...
Oh, I thought there was a chimney that had come down.
No.
Okay.
The chimney in the rear, the fireplace. Chimney's in the back. Octagonal room in the front.
Yeah,
I think it's just.
Yeah.
So what had been a vintage stack was long ago removed.
Okay.
And we are not suggesting that it go back.
Okay.
Was that in the original drawing?
Yes.
Next presentation will include those drawings because it is kind of fun. They were at the State Archives.
So to emphasize the heretical part.
Okay, keep going.
We're preserving the building, but in the case of preserving the fireplace that is completely, sounds like 100% non-functional, I'm not sure I understand why we do that.
Oh, I suppose because it's a charming, wonderful element to it, and it's the user of that room, and we hope that room will be used, will simply have something that is pleasing to recall.
Peter, you had something you want to say?
Yeah, just.
Want to shoot the heretic?
I just wanted to make the point that this building is on the National Historic Register. So, you can start to defame that and start to remove things, say, oh, well, we'll save $800 by not saving the fireplace. I mean, it's a de minimis amount of money, but, you really want to try to be as faithful as you can to the original building when you're undertaking the restoration of a building of this nature that has, gone through the process of getting registered, that the town had done. I don't know if the town did or if...
I think the town did that between the time we did that initial stabilization feeder.
And today, yeah, so.
And I think you've got a very good point. These elements are part of the character of the building. What Curtis was just saying to me is to remind me that there is something called the Secretary of the Interior Standards for the treatment of historic buildings. And with that, you want to save those elements and reuse them when possible, the things that give character. And character is what we also know and look at. We look at a face and it says something to us. The face of this building, whether it's inside or outside, has elements that are good to hold on to and recall. But what Curtis was doing when he was talking about widening that door, he was squeezing the fireplace open. But it's simply, I think, quite honestly, an attractive relic. It's good.
Also, you have an essentially round room that, when you're in there, there isn't really a focus. So the fireplace gives you something that helps you feel oriented in the room.
the town moderator left me with some instructions. If this becomes before town meeting, and I'm talking to all those people out there, the first question that will be asked is, what are we going to use this building for? I was here previously when this was discussed, somewhat short of extensively. I think a clear explanation of how this building will be used is very, very important. Personally, I mentioned, well, before I go to that, there were people in the room that said this building should be open all the time. And I couldn't agree with that anymore. If we're going to put $1.5 million into a building, it should be a town building that's open. I mentioned a gift shop, a welcoming center slash Chamber of Commerce type situation. People have alluded to maybe we'll have some functions now and then, and people may say, well, if we're going to spend that much money, how many functions, what kind of functions? The other thing that moderator asked me to bring up was there have been people in town, important people, because they're the ones that will decide on what ultimately happens with this project, that say, well, we know there's not a lot of room for archiving anything there, but if the library wanted to keep some things in this building, is the environment within the building, and I know there's problems with insulation and bricks and mold and rotting if insulation allows the inside of the bricks to get wet and so forth. Will the climate control be adequate to allow that sort of thing? And I would like to hear some discussion on both of these issues, the issue of usage of the building. Not me personally, I think the people out there watching this, and climate control, if there are some important things that need to be kept in the building. Thank you.
So, usage of the building, I think, is something that we would defer obviously to the town and its management. But usage that we thought was appropriate would be meetings. As you heard, upwards of 42 people can be accommodated in that building at tables and chairs. Well, what does that suggest? That suggests that on occasion it could be a place where the Boy Scouts are having a pancake breakfast. And maybe they're not making the pancakes there, but it's bringing it in. There could be that kind of function and activity. There could be lectures where it's set up for a lecture on the Civil War or civic or matter of interest in the community. Maybe it's a mosquito control session, and we were talking about what that means. So those uses can vary. We have worked in two other situations where formerly buildings that I would say were active that become redundant have been repurposed both as civic meeting spaces, but spaces that are rented on occasion. In fact, I should say I've worked on at least 4 of them. So that's a possibility. So what does that mean? It means it can be used for, a bridal shower, and the town is getting some kind of revenues from that. There's a policy about how the thing could be rented and cleaned and all that kind of thing. So that's some of the things that could be considered there. I think the matter of what it would mean to create archival storage that is climate controlled is a whole other subject. So there's 2 things. When we talk about HVAC, we're talking about heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So that controls a lot of humidity concerns right there, as well as human comfort. If you wanted to create archival storage, and we've done this on occasion in historic buildings, and then you have to create basically a place where there will be humidity controls that may include adding humidity to the space. So if you're doing important historical records and you want to maintain an even 50% humidity, you would create a room within a room and put a banquet area in it and actually create a dedicated climate control space. I'm not sure you have the records that would, warrant that kind of precision, but that is possible. I'm also not sure that this is the building that makes a lot of sense. If you have cemetery records, because that has been brought to our attention on several occasions, and those are paper records that are kept in various people's homes, in file cabinets in their homes, and you want to bring them all into one space, I would say that the normal kind of air conditioning and heating, throughout the season would be adequate for most paper records. If you've got 18th century documents and 19th century rag paper and pulp paper documents, then we're into a different discussion. So that's the kind of gradient that we're talking about. I hope that helps you.
What kind of heat were you anticipating? What kind of a system were you?
I think that our recent experience has really been with heat pumps as being an economical system to both install and with good regulation and controls to operate. But what we're looking at with Wasney Garber and our associates is that as one option. The other option is a split system that could be a gas-fired system that then has air conditioning as a second, is a corollary element to it. Our building is small, so, any more elaborate systems just don't seem appropriate. No cooling towers here.
You can think of this as a medium-sized home, actually, it's 2,500 square feet.
So if, and maybe not this far along in the thought process, but if, I think you had pictured the second floor having a mechanical area, and where would if it was a heat pump, where would the external components be located?
Well, they probably would, one thing to do would be to actually put them on the...
It seems like the southwest corner would be
here.
Yes.
The least visible, but not the most accessible.
Would you put them here?
No, put them on the shoulder side, so there'd be some outside.
On the west side,
On the west side.
the south,
Yeah,
or
the
the
southwest, but which is catty corner to the mechanical room, right?
Again, we're talking about small
Yeah,
systems.
yeah.
We just had our rooftop equipment installed on a project we're doing on Beacon Hill today, which was exciting, but this is not a building to have any kind of rooftop equipment. This is probably the kind of building that with 2 heat pumps you're going. And what that does is enable us to have some amount of zoning, which I think would be pretty, and zoning is, and that's what I meant by zoning and controls is one way of actually, helping with the cost of long-term operations.
What was
In terms of the septic system, what was did you use 100 people as the calculation in terms of using that as occasional 100? How do you, in other words, how did you calculate the size of a tank or whatever to use for that in this situation?
Well, I mean, again, that is a calculation that dictates the size of the tank.
Okay, so, but you used used 100, okay.
We would use 100.
Yeah, okay.
We're gonna take, I don't want to say the worst case, we're gonna take the best case, which is the building is fully occupied. And
Okay.
using it a lot. So, that would be the way to think about it. A tight tank is something that basically means that you have a maintenance cost
Right.
associated with that. I mean, it's being pumped, on, on a periodic basis. But it was interesting to us that the Board of Health recommended that type of system for this building.
Okay.
So I guess I'm
Okay,
trying to.
Casey?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, go ahead, Casey.
Hi, I'm Casey Swallow. I have two concerns about this. The first one is that it has to be sold to the citizens of West Newbury, and for that to happen, they have to get excited about it. And to have a space that can be used for the occasional meeting or lecture is just not very exciting. So I don't see exactly how we're going to drum up a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for the project when it's an occasional meeting, an occasional lecture. And the other problem I have with it is I'm listening carefully to what you're saying, and if the building's not used, if it's not occupied, if it's not heated all the time, it will again fall into rock and ruin. And if it's only being used occasionally for a lecture or meeting, a shower or whatever, all good uses of it, then it will sit idle for long periods of time and not be utilized, and therefore won't have the upkeep and the occupancy that's required to keep a building healthy. So from my perspective, the most important thing that we can do, those of us who would like to see the building restored, is to come up with a more vibrant use for the building, something that would keep it open a lot, that would make people really want to do this because they see this as a real benefit to the community. And I wish I could tell you that I have all these wonderful ideas floating around in my head. I do not. The survey that was done, and there was another survey done at the library, was very far-ranging about potential things. So that gives you an idea of what people are thinking about the value of doing something like this. And of course, it's a multi-generational town. It's a multi-generational survey. You ask history buffs, and it would make a great museum. I think there was one suggestion that we turn it into a swimming complex. So
I have to tell you that I just saw this on the list. It was indoor swimming pool, cafe, food pantry, youth for kids space, concert hall, and something called an escape room, and somebody will have to tell me what that is. Now, if that's yoga and meditation, okay. I don't know. But I do think that you are absolutely correct. The impetus for creating an active use that has something happening in that building every day is the first thing we would love to see happen. That needs to come from you. We're creating a space that is, quite honestly, a vessel that will enable you to do that.
Yes. I was scratching some notes in the back, and I thought, there is a certain amount of interest in town about doing things that will encourage intergenerational interaction. There's a committee that's working on a community center, not a senior center, but a community center where people could get together and engage in various activities. I don't think that building's big enough for that, and maybe not the right configuration, but there is an interest in that kind of thing. There's also an interest in education of, preserving the culture, the history of West Newbury in a way that it's not hidden in the attic of the library or in people's basements or wherever else it's hidden away, but is actually accessible so that school groups could come in and study it, that people could come in and study archives. So there are good ideas out there, and I will continue to try to, rack my brain to come up with more interesting suggestions for what we might use the building for. But anyway, that's just my input, that I think that that's probably the most important thing we can do.
So one thing that I think is really interesting about this building in regard to what you just said is that it's an active part of the history of this town. It's a memorial to Civil War soldiers, but it's actually different from most memorials in that it's a memorial you can actually get inside. And so this is the exact place where you would want to be bringing your town together to learn about history, to bring the kids together, have intergenerational contacts. It seems like a building very well suited for that, and that's exciting as a thematic element of the building.
So when we say it could be used for meetings have comment and displays, I have to say what we're hoping is that there's something that helps tell the story of this building over time, and actually helps people prepare for what is in front of us now. Let's not just look at the past. This is a place where we could have dialogue about, the challenges we have as a nation. They're real. So, and the challenges we have as a region. We have concerns about energy and about sustainability. Great place to have forums and meetings that talk about that. And the building as a historic building that gets reused and sustained is itself saying that. Well, let's get dialogue around that discussion.
Good, thank you.
I'm concerned about the parking issue and how many, we've talked about different numbers, I think 42 numbers and 90, or 42 people and 90 something people. And it's great. I like that idea, but I'm not sure with 8 spots.
We're going to have a slide to talk about that.
Okay, good, because I see that as a major practical issue.
Yeah, I mean, even something like having, a bridal shower, yeah, but then people have to walk quite a ways with stuff that it's not, that kind of lessens its impact in that kind of a situation.
It then becomes very seasonal, and if people are walking a significant distance, its accessibility really becomes a seasonal issue, and if they're walking along a state highway, it just compounds the issue, and so I'm interested in your slide.
We actually had to fight with the planning board to get 8 spaces because they only wanted to give us 6. So
600 feet away.
They
100 spaces could be accessed by the sidewalk. Is what this slide is showing.
Yeah, and I'll just elaborate a little bit. So we have a very strange bylaw on parking. It doesn't have a prescriptive parking ratio like most any other zoning bylaw would. But a public project is subject to zoning review, just as a private project would be. So it would be up to the planning board of what level of parking would be needed. But for any type of assembly above, a really small community meeting, you would need a lot more parking than what is available or what is adjacent. So I did ask the team to put together just a schematic. This idea has been kicked around of could people park here and walk up the street. You can see that they put this together at a very schematic level. I would have some practical concerns about this, both the distance in the first place, but also the fact there's not a sidewalk on the correct side of the road, so people would have to cross a state highway twice to get to where they're going, and I think that would raise some concerns into whether you can really advertise it as a public assembly place. I think that's a barrier for people to be able to access it. It's not to say it's not solvable, but I wanted to be sure this was part of the discussion, because I think that over the life of the building, that's something that could be solvable, but you're potentially talking about a new sidewalk, potentially street lighting, and even then, even if you could just snap your fingers and make all that happen, will people walk that distance?
I question that. People grouse about. I've heard people grouse about walking from the far corner of the back lot here.
Yes.
So now we're quadrupling that, tripling to quadrupling that distance. So, I just want to bring up realistic concerns.
Yep.
We hear you on
Yeah.
that, and if
Yeah.
there was more space to be squeeze it.
Yeah.
If there was a better option,
Right,
we would.
right.
Just talking about off-the-wall stuff. Is there any rule against permeable parking in wetlands? I'm not talking about paved, hot top or concrete or whatever,
Yeah,
but gravel parking.
yeah.
Is that allowed?
I don't know, that's, I guess the place to start with a question like that is the Concom, and, but, I don't know.
Yeah. And the other is, what is the rule about parking on a state highway? Because I got myself a pizza at lunch today, I just parked in front of, and I park when I get my hair cut, and
Yeah.
nobody ever says a word.
It's something we should confirm, but my understanding is that we're not supposed, even though we all do, particularly by the post office or certain other places.
Well, but there are signs
But-
on either side of the post office that says no parking between these signs. So
Right.
clearly that you can park other than those signs.
Right.
So there's also,
Another possibility.
Yeah.
there is currently existing parking in the circular driveway in front of the building, which currently the civil plan that was generated by the town and the developer has called for the elimination of that area. But it's possible that we could design additional parking in the front that would be accessed by a drive that comes down the side of the building. I think the reason that was eliminated was that having two entrances.
That affects the state highway entrance,
So
correct, yes.
In order to have the parking here, we would not have street access. You would come in through here, drive down the side and park in here, and
Yeah.
you would exit again through that way.
Which would, again, pave a lot of area that we would like to have drainage from, yes.
I think what we would suggest is rather than paving it, that we would just leave it gravel, so it would be secondary.
There's also those paving stones that have grass that grows.
Right, yeah, the
So it's permeable and yet
Right.
it looks.
Well, it grows weeds well,
Well,
but but they're green.
I would still, I think another thing that is absolutely going to come up at town meeting is a way to space out the project. There's no, to my mind, it's going to be a really tough nut to talk about a building that's going to be $600 a square foot to rehab, and without I totally agree that we've got to get some ideas that will generate some enthusiasm to the voters, but that's one issue. But it's even if it was a great idea, it's a very expensive project for the amount of square foot that we're getting out of this. So I think that somehow that we have to be able to space this out over more than definitely more than 1 year. It's my personal feeling on what's going to fly at town meeting, because there's a lot. People have to be aware that there's a lot of big projects that are going on in this town. This is a slightly different pot of money, but ultimately CPC money, most of it comes from the taxpayers of the town. We have other big projects going on. High school, a very big bridge project, a massive water system rehab. So there's a lot of things going on in the town.
simultaneously. So we have to, if you want this to fly, we have to do more than, I think, say, well, we're gonna have a few meetings there, we'll put some storage. I mean, that's not gonna fly. To say we're gonna spend $1.5 million to get storage, that's, it's not gonna fly.
Yeah, we just have to come up with a compelling use, something that, and I'm not, I'm drawing a blank. In order for it to fly at town meeting,
our committee is not gonna worry about that aspect of it other than individually, but that's not really our charge. But I guess I have some question about the amount of money that is in the CPC funds, how it's not being used today, and why there was a movement last year to reduce the amount of money we're putting in. I don't know what other areas that we would plan on using that money for. As far as the water department is concerned, they run independently. We may lay out the money, but, that's not money that would be used for that. The high school certainly wouldn't be money, I don't think, that would be used for.
No, but these are all dollars that come from
that money,
people in the town.
We've already put that money in. I've written out a check for the last 20 years, as have everybody in town, and we now have, Angus, correct me if I'm wrong, $1.8 million or so in CPC funds that could be used for this kind of a project?
It could, I mean, Chairman's point.
What else is in the path that we're looking at that would use those funds?
Well, for example, a lot of the there's more than one area that this would be using a lot of the unassigned balance, as well as.
I'm asking what other things is the town looking at using some of that money that they would be allowed to use that money for? Part of it be used for the bridge?
No, I don't
Okay.
see that, no.
That's Mass Highway funds or some other.
No, that's probably West Newbury funds. And if grant money, if we can get some, yeah.
Some grant money.
Yeah.
That's what we're hoping for.
But, it would be nice to know, and I think that falls to you guys, is what is the plan for all this money that the town is collecting from its citizens, then be using it for other than good works? And this is a good work for the town. And I understand
but there are different parts of the money, like there's parks and open space recreation, there's historical preservation, and what am I forgetting? And housing, and I think people, if we look at the amount of money that's been allocated to different parts, a very, very low percentage of it, for example, has been allocated towards housing. That's just one thing.
In fact, the largest component so far has been allocated, categorized as historic preservation for use of Page School, and that's how we were able to fund the work that was done at Page School by categorizing it as historic preservation. So, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't spend more money on historic preservation. It's just that at some point people are going to ask, what are we doing about the other categories? The recreation aspect and housing, I wish I had thought to bone up beforehand, because it's readily available in various places. The information that shows the funding that currently is available for each of the three categories, specifically for each of the three categories, and then the general pot that can be used for any of the categories. I don't know what those numbers are off the top of my head.
Do you have the break? Angus has the breakdown.
Oh, you do. Okay. So I guess the question is, how deeply do we reach into the general pot to, for one project? I don't know the answer to that question. I guess we find the answer to that question possibly at town meeting.
Well, if the town is gonna be looking to you,
Right.
as one of our town leaders,
Right.
to say, yeah, I think this is a good use of the money, or you think
Yeah.
it's a lousy use of the
Yeah.
money. That's, you know.
Yep.
I think one way the board might approach it, certainly the way I think about it, is not so much, well, and I'm in a different position than the board. I'm not elected, I'm not a taxpayer, it's your money. So the way I look at it is making sure the voters have the information to make an informed decision, and part of that is, if you fund this project, what other projects would you not be able to do? And so there are certainly any number of specific things that have been kicked around until they're formally proposed as CPC projects. They're not CPC projects, but there's different land acquisitions, some for open space value, at least one as a source of potential future water source. There's a proposal right now before the CPC from the Housing Authority, which is a $300,000 proposal, so that'll be something that'll be considered this cycle. There's been certainly discussion about improving the accessibility of some of the playgrounds in town. So there's a universe of potential uses, and that just doesn't even hardly scratch the surface. But I think to your point, I think voters need to be looking at that and weighing the relative importance, because there's a lot of important and very, very worthwhile ways to expend that money. Another thing that should be talked about is, or at least acknowledged, is that even if the town wanted to fund the entire project, that doesn't need to necessarily all come out of the bank in the next year or two. There are options to finance something like this and to pay the debt service over 20 years out of CPC funds. Other towns have done that for major land acquisition projects, and it's not something, I'm not sure that that's been done here, but it is an option that we could look at.
One thing I'd like to just throw out is I chair community preservation in my town. And after years of having projects come to us piecemeal, the Board of Selectmen and the Finance and Advisory Committee said, we want to see some kind of master plan of CPC, potential CPC projects, and be able to weigh what it means to make an investment in year one on a project, and what does it mean for the other projects that are in the queue. And I don't know if you have any of that kind of capability, but that has actually been, I won't say transformative, but it certainly has helped us make decisions that then the town meeting voters on can understand the context and the rationality for those recommendations. That's one thing. The second thing is that in my town, we have also financed larger projects by bonding them. And we've done that on not only land acquisition, but on recreation. I happen to live in a waterfront community. Let's face it, it's surrounded by water, it's not. So things like our wharf and our waterfront structures were bonded projects. We've just bonded a project on our library building. So for us, that was a way of taking a relatively small annual appropriation from CPC funds and extending the value. Now, yes, is there a cost of interest? The fact is that interest is unbelievably low right now.
Right.
So this is kind of a time, if you're thinking about it, to think about what it means to have a 2.8% interest on a 20-year bond. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, it's, the interest rates are extraordinarily low, and they're, it's near almost free money. Yeah.
Almost free.
Right.
Kevin?
Yeah, watching it at home, those poor people, I'm very loud, you're very loud, you're not very loud. But anyways, from our original discussions, it seems like our timeline has changed a little bit. As I alluded to earlier, we were talking about more of a phased-in project, stabilize it this summer, this winter, hopefully have, fundraising might not work out practically, and then we had time to think of the use as the project was evolving, because we all recognize we need to, restore that building, or, within a couple of years, be able to take care of itself. So let's primarily focus on that, at least, the envelope or whatever, and then hopefully have time to iron out everything else. And all of a sudden now we're talking, November for 1.5 million for the town meeting, and I absolutely agree with you. That wasn't going to sell. I mean, I thought we were going to go to the town meeting in the fall with something smaller that was easily digestible, and I guess if we're on, and again, the charge of the committee is not to worry about the use, it's to save the building, which is our primary goal.
With the architects.
Yeah, which is everyone's first goal. And so, so I mean the timeline shifted, so the reality shifted, and it seems either we have to figure out a use very quickly, intergenerational, this and that, or we kind of, I'm not advocating slowing it down or speeding it up, whatever. This just seems to be where we got ourselves. I don't think it was our intention to ask for 1.5, at least when we started those conversations. So I just wanted to raise that, because it does seem as if there's a, I don't want to say an impasse or whatever, but I do think that we're operating on different assumptions, and we either need to figure out a use real quick and do a straight sell job on November 4th, or go back to some kind of phased-in ask.
So I can speak to that a little bit, as I've kind of been the...
Well, circumstances happen, I'm not saying how it,
No, but you're totally on point, and I don't want you or anybody to jump to the conclusion that a $1.5 million proposal is the only option that the voters have. I think part of what I have been hearing from different people in town and members of the committee, and really everybody, selectmen as well, is that if you bring a proposal to town meeting, whether for the whole thing or for some portion of it, people are going to want to know what is the total cost. If you ask people to invest another $200,000, they'll say, well, what's it going to take to bring it back to active use? So that was how the scope was developed.
Right.
It was always talked about from last, probably late winter, early spring, when I first spoke with Lynn on the phone. It's always talked about as a phased, money over time, and I totally get that it doesn't appear that that's what's in front of you. That doesn't mean the selectmen or the CPC or even town meeting couldn't go forward with something less than that, but we wanted to make sure that the voters, when asked to do anything, had a sense of what is the total investment that's needed. Because if the town, let's say, were to invest in the stabilization of the exterior, which the orders of magnitude is just short of $500,000. So if that investment was to be made without a commitment of the full amount, people would need to know we're putting a bunch of public money into a building that either the fundraising happens or it doesn't, and if it doesn't happen, it maybe goes back to the voters, maybe not for a year or two, or maybe 5 years, or maybe 8 years, but at some point, the total investment that we're talking about is, that's the question that we needed to answer. Now that we have that information, it's really up to the both the elected officials to bring that forward or not, and in what form, and then the CPC to recommend that to town meeting or not, or some subset, and then there's a scenario where town meeting appropriates less than the full amount. So one thing I did want to invite Lynn to comment on, part of what's driven a sense of urgency, certainly for me personally, I think for the committee as well, is just that, Marley had, Marley didn't drive here, but Marley wrote up some notes from a site visit last fall. And then there were the more recent observations since Lynn and her team and the structural engineers have been in there. You can see just in a year's time that the condition's degrading. So, Lynn spoke at the earlier meeting earlier tonight about the timeliness of issuing bid documents, that you really need to hit that winter early in the season to get people. It's a hot economy, the contractors are busy. If you miss that window, you basically missed, a whole year.
Another winter.
Right, yeah. So what I wanted to hear from Lynn is, let's say over the course of the next, week or a few weeks or month, the decision's made to kind of slow things down and go to the spring. Part of how I see that is you're basically losing not 6 months, but a whole year, because before you could bid it, you're talking about the spring of 2021 before anything actually happens. So if you could comment on based on what you've seen of the building,
Sure.
what would be lost in a year?
And I will try to actually hang right here, so everyone can hear me. I think what we are looking at is that we do need to get that exterior envelope taken care of. What will be lost will be the continued deterioration at the tower and the brickwork associated with that. The vulnerability of windows. Right now we say they're very retrievable, much longer, both as an attractive nuisance, not that people will throw a rock through them, but with the pressure of weather and time, that will deteriorate. The good news is that we've stabilized the sort of bulge at the longitudinal side of the building. It may not be attractive to everyone's eye, but that is stable, and that was a worthwhile investment. But I think that it's really the exterior envelope that is in danger. In terms of what we think would make sense if you were to face it is obviously to focus on the exterior envelope, the work that keeps the weather out and ensures the structural stability. And to that end, we think it makes sense to advance dealing with the moisture that we see in the basement as part of that phase. So moving forward with a flowable fill and taking care of the first floor concrete slab makes a boatload of sense to us. So yes, would that sort of take this $1.5 million budget and sort of rejigger it? I think if we're going to be just north of $500,000 by the time we sort of factor in all the elements. But we wanted you to be able to see the entire picture, as Angus was saying, and then when you're making decisions about what would be a first phase, that it's reasonable and allows you to have the next step without a lot of redoing of things. So exterior envelope, roof repairs, gutters, window restoration, reconstruction of the tower and the crenellations, and repointing the entire exterior and dealing with filling the cellar hole makes a lot of sense to us. Do we also say, gosh, at the same time, bring in the utilities because it's subsurface work and you're going to have, that kind of thing on the site? That might make sense. On the other hand, that could be postponed. But I think you do want to make it possible for people in the community to see the potential, and that for groups within the community to come forward with exciting and doable and ideas that actually activate that building. But until they see the potential of it can happen, they're all going to be, over in the corner. Get it something that people, if you build it, they will come. Well, that may be the approach.
Do you think, if we did the exterior stabilization and got utilities, new utilities in, or upgraded, do you think it would be practical to put in some portion of the HVAC to be able to keep the building on sort of thermal life support for winter? Because if we just stabilize it, but we don't keep it heated, and it's not on thermal life support, then it's going to begin, it's going to be coming from a good place, but it's going to begin to degrade right away the first winter.
Well, yes, it will have impacts on finishes. Now, those finishes were finishes that we were going to take out.
Yeah.
But in terms of masonry and windows and so on, yes, it makes sense to have a low amount of heat, which helps control sort of the moisture factors. I think that could be something that could be considered. I also have to say, on the other other hand, I've worked on lots of buildings that didn't have heat in them. And, you know, I wouldn't do it forever, but it's not impossible.
Isn't there a temporary heating system in the building that was put in under the project that you did about 5 years ago?
I don't think we actually installed that heating system, but there
Somebody
is
did at that
a
time.
pretty new unit in there now, isn't there,
It
Bob?
was put in by, I'm not sure if the engineers did it or not, but, I forget who did it at this point. I'm horrible with names. You get older, you can't remember names.
Oh, that's okay. And is there a reason that we're not running it now? Or hasn't
To
it?
be perfectly honest with you, the board of selectmen have shut it off and didn't want to run it. That was, I'm not gonna say these guys.
You're off the hook, you just got elected. Yeah.
Danny Haskell was the one who put that in. He worked for, well, he's worked for 3 or 4 different heating companies, so he's the one who put that first.
All right, it's only about 5 years ago.
Somewhere less than 10, I think over 5, but less than 10.
Peter, it looks pretty fresh.
Yeah, I thought it was done around the time that the stabilization was.
No, it was done before that.
Oh, was it?
It was done before that. I don't remember when it was done.
That's not gas, that's oil, correct?
Hmm?
That's oil, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that would be something that would be worked out. That now resides in the basement.
Right.
As do the fuel oil.
Right, which wouldn't work if the basement was filled.
Exactly.
Okay, I think we've gotten everybody's thought. Anyone have anything, new ideas? I think one tactic would be that if we could come up with a number that would say, okay, now we know what doing the whole thing, or approximately, would cost. What can we do for the outside of the building to stabilize the building, and if need be, if we have to have some kind of heat in the building at the same time, have that factored in. But I think that would be a good other number to have as a backup, rather than say, well, we think it'll be about this, but we're not sure. We really have to have that that number nailed down. Did you agree with that, Rick, or, yeah?
I do.
I would just caution you that back in 2014, we spent $100,000 or authorized $100,000 to stabilize the outside of the building. I don't think we're talking about stabilizing the building at this point. I think we're talking about an exterior renovation.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Because stabilization was a waste of money.
Right, and verbiage makes a big deal.
Yes, because
That was not a good use of the word,
It was
yeah.
just a Band-Aid on a building that was falling down, and now we're at the point where if we want to split it up into exterior renovation and an interior renovation, that's fine. And I understand the price tag is huge, but part of the whole purpose of community preservation funding is to fund projects like this that are very expensive that you would not normally do with your own money. So that's why we get the match. That's why this is set up this way. My concern with bifurcating this project is that we will lose some economies of scale, because if we renovate the outside and then we have to add the utilities, how do we do that if the floor is falling in on the inside? How do we, if we're going to put the utility package on the second floor, then we have to make sure it's safe enough for someone to go up there and access that on a regular basis. So I don't know if you start carving pieces on and say, well, this is interior, this is exterior. I don't know how much you ultimately save, or you end up costing yourself because you're revisiting something more than once.
And sometimes you spend twice as much
Exactly.
doing small pieces.
And I wonder, as I look through the breakdown, I don't think there's a lot of wiggle room here in terms of having our DPW do any of this work. There's some work that maybe they could do. I don't know how much. I mean, it doesn't look like maybe
Looking at the
50, 100,000.
The Bennett School, there's, potential.
Peter, if you could just use the mic.
Oh, sorry.
Lynn had mentioned the Bennett School and that they do wood window restoration. If we could look at those kinds of things in ways of saving some money, that would be very helpful, I think. But if we refer to it as restoration as opposed to rehab or whatever.
I think I would like, sorry, I would just like to address the subject of dividing up the project and extending it. I do think that if there's any doubt about the commitment for the reuse of the interior, and the more time needs to be spent on developing that I can understand that. It will extend the general conditions, it will extend the cost, the escalation costs for inflation and so on. So there are impacts for stretching a project out over time. On the other hand, not having a use that actually gets people excited and understands, gives them the sense that they get value out of voting for its ultimate comprehensive preservation. I understand it's a very practical reservation that people will have. So I think that part of it needs to be developed further. If you were to do just the exterior preservation and you really want to get something in front of the voters and then in front of people to see that work is actually happening, here's the kind of schedule that we could be looking at. You've got your meeting at the beginning of November for the town meeting. Let's just say in that scenario, just for the sake of discussing a scenario, it's the exterior work, the foundation work, and the utilities. When that gets voted, that a contract gets negotiated in November to move forward. If our firm is selected to continue to work with you, it would require 2 to possibly 3 months to develop the contract documents, the bid documents for taking this out to construction. When it goes out to bid, so that could be December, January, February in terms of schedule. That would mean bidding in March and April. It really takes 2 months for bidding, because even if this is exterior preservation only, there would be filed sub-bidding requirements associated with, for instance, the masonry work. That could then have us with the start of construction in May, which would be the right time to start an exterior preservation project. At the same time, if the thinking gets developed on the interior and you want to go to the next spring town meeting because you've got something really worked up and an exciting proposal for the interior, then it's possible to think about that being a separate bid, but almost a concurrent, or sequential, a tight sequential budget or endeavor. And I think that makes some sense, so long as that interior plan is really been more fully developed and understood by people. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be involved in helping.
Well, thank you for your assistance, great.
Good thinking, good ideas, It's a good thorough look at the building and, yeah.
Casey?
I just have one thought, sure. I can't think of a specific one off the top of my head, but I'm aware that there are many communities that have repurposed historic buildings for other uses, and gotten very exciting projects about it. And I think it might do us some good to do a little bit of research on what kinds of projects other small communities have undertaken to to repurpose historic buildings for a modern use, and rather than just sitting around and trying to dream up something out of the tops of our heads. Take advantage of what information's out there to get ideas from other communities.
So the way I'm looking at this, to get a proposal to CPC at the end of the week, that's what I'm intending to do. I'm going to learn something going through the CPC process on the way I read the project application guidelines. It seems like there's an expectation that everything's kind of tied up with a bow before it's presented to CPC. But this, from the word go, I think has always been more of an iterative process, both because of the scale, the complexity, the amount of resources it took just to get to this point, where we're still at the schematic design level. So I think it's going to be interesting. Let's say the full proposal was put before CPC, but with it explicitly acknowledged in the proposal that this is, there's still, at the time they have their hearing, that's still 6 weeks before town meeting. There's still time for more public input in terms of whether what ultimately is put to the voters is the full amount, something less. So I think it's going to be, what I would suggest is that, with the board's direction, that we would put in a proposal with the full amount a week from tonight at the regularly scheduled Selectmen meeting, when we have the full board present. And I should acknowledge, for those watching, Selectman Kemper, I did speak with him earlier today. He did share his thoughts on this. It's his wife's birthday, so he was unable to be here tonight, but he's very interested in the project. So a week from tonight with the full board, you could look at the proposal, and if you decide that you would only support a subset, then that's still 4 days before the CPC meeting, and we could let them know that. But I think that's, from the outset, I've felt, and I know the board shares this opinion, whatever happens with this building, I think it's very important that the voters make that decision. So even if we get to a point where there's less than majority support, whether on the Selectmen for the full thing, or even on the CPC for what's put to them, I would look to them to, and I don't know if they would do this or could do this, but to put something before the voters, even if it doesn't have their recommendation for passage, because whatever happens with the building, if a year goes by and if this building starts to crumble and the voters have never been given the option to save it, I think I feel we wouldn't have done our jobs. So I do think it's important at the end of the day that the voters make the decision. What gets put before them is up to you guys.
Absolutely.
So I know, it's asking a lot, of course, of these elected officials. It's a big number. And sometimes there's the assumption, if you put it in front of the voters, that you're saying you should do this. Sometimes I think the right thing is to say, these are your options, and you maybe individually take a position. I'm not sure how you want to do it. I mean, people do look for the Selectmen for leadership, but this is such a big question, and there's not necessarily a right answer, because if you invest the money, you get a lot, you get what you're seeing. If you don't invest the money, you don't. But if you invest the money, you get this. But that is $1.5 million that you will not have for other worthy projects. So you are giving something up. There's no decision here that doesn't have trade-offs. So I think you present those trade-offs to the voters, and
I guess we could go to town meeting with sort of sequential options.
like an a la carte. Is that what you're?
Well, not quite an a la carte, because, one option would be exclusive, potentially be exclusive of the others. The all-in option would exclude an article that was a partial.
Well, we actually could have two warrant articles that are mutually exclusive, actually.
Yeah.
So the idea that I was actually putting forward is you could have one article that is for the exterior preservation. Now, if you wanted in the same town meeting to have a second article for the interior work, that might be possible. I was thinking it might be this autumn town meeting for the exterior, and then in the spring for the regular annual town meeting.
Yeah, yeah, I was envisioning, you know, that what you suggested makes more sense than what I was thinking, is I think it through more.
Well,
I was thinking of an, you know, the entire project, or just the external restoration, but I think actually, it would more à la carte, as you said, Angus, would make more sense, breaking it down into two segments, and then, you know, asking first to fund the external restoration, and then the second article, either now or at a subsequent town meeting, would be for internal.
There may be a third option. You know, it's almost mandatory that the exterior be done. I mean, it's either that or, you know, $50,000, tear it down,
Right.
they could go away. So you have that. Then you could also say, we're going to do the basic interior work as a second piece. You're gonna have the 2 bathrooms no matter what you do. You're gonna if you're gonna use the second floor, you're gonna have to have the lift. So there's a level of finish on the inside, bring in the utilities and what have you. And then the third option is all the interior finish, when a determination is made on the 2 floors as to how they would be used. Whether you're going to be building display cabinets of historic documents, you know, whether you're going to set up the upstairs for the library and the cemetery commissions and what have you, to use that for documentation. You don't have a lot of weight when you just have, you know, chips and what have you. So maybe there's even a third, you know, there's 3 pieces of work that could be done. But the basic second phase allows the building to be raised to a level of things that would go in it no matter what you used it for. You know, you're gonna have to have 2 bathrooms. You know, you're gonna have to have a lift. You're gonna have to have the handicap.
But that's probably most of the money, though.
Well, I guess that's what we'd have to ask our architects to sort of flesh out these pieces for us.
so if I interpret this correctly, Peter, I think what you're saying is, you know, maybe the interior portion of it is the infrastructure and the restrooms and the lift, and you leave the finishes out of it. And you only do the finishes when that's decided. So then we say, well, what are the finishes? Well, there's the wood floor on the first floor, there's drywall and painting, and associated trim repair.
Kitchenette.
There's the actual kitchenette, you know, some cabinets and so on. There's not, I guess I would say, it's an interesting idea. It may be something that, you know, if you have users, maybe they're doing the fit out. But it's not a lot of money.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah, it's not a lot of money. The costs really are, you know, is the infrastructure, the plumbing, the electrical wiring, you know, the HVAC, the lift, you know, and the finishes for the restrooms. So, but the question is, would you need to have a kitchenette? No. You know, you might just have restrooms. And, you know, if you don't use the second floor, you don't need the lift. So it's really thinking about how those spaces are used. The thing I would caution against is actually moving forward on the project and not having really worked out those uses. I would caution about that. I've got a project, and you know, I can give you a whole list of buildings that we've worked on that fall under the category of redundant municipal buildings. Former public libraries, former schools, you know, a life-saving station in the Hunt, that kind of thing. And having uses that actually fulfill current needs, I think, is part of the key Keith, understanding. Creating opportunities for future groups to form and come in is another thing, but that is a little bit problematic. But, you know, if you had citizens forum, for instance, and you're looking for a place, this is the place. If you have, you know, a recreation department that is looking for office space, this is the place. You know, if you have a historical society that really wants to have a display space and at the same time have meeting space available, this is the place. And it's really thinking that specifically that I think will have value to you.
If I could just reiterate to the board, I think this project back in 2013-14 received support at town meeting to stabilize the building. I think everyone finds it to be a valuable, iconic building in town. The board just accepted 2 private donations tonight. I know that there was another one earlier, and I know there's another one coming. These are people who are just writing checks. They weren't asked. They were writing checks because they believe in the restoration of this building. So I think it is problematic trying to figure out what we're going to do with the building, but I think if you can take the sense of the community that they love this building and they want to see it saved, I think we need to find a way to get that done.
The community preservation website has an enormous amount of information statewide about specifics about projects, the budgets, their reviews, and that would be a great place to look at comparables. Our firm can give you a number of examples. I think I can come up with about 12 off the top of my head. And 2 of them have been buildings that are of similar size to this one, or not 2, but several of them similar size to this one, which, you know, oddly enough, I won't say limits, but focuses the kind of uses that can be used. You're not talking about 15,000 square feet where you can have multiple uses. We're talking about 2,500 square feet, so it's really, you know, a targeted kind of use. You know, it was a pretty good use for a long time, was the car post. Right?
One of the things on the
It was
list
pretty
was
good use.
having a club here, 10 out of 4.
I think a tight tank might be a problem.
Yeah, but there are trees after that.
So Curtis also reminds me, other things that municipalities have done is in fact leased a building on a private basis. So it remains owned by the municipality, owned by the town of West Newbury, but it's leased to somebody on some kind of basis. And, you know, could it be a great restaurant or coffee shop? Yes. Could it be private offices on the 2nd floor? Yes. There's guidelines about procurement and how those things are managed, but those are also possibilities.
Okay, I think it's getting late. So the board will plan to, I want the project to go to the voters. I want it to go to town meeting. So the plan would be, I don't know whether we can do a CPC proposal with more than one option. So I think we have to do it with the for the whole nut. But perhaps so there will be questions at town meeting. I think that having a kind of no pun intended, a concrete figure of what restoring the envelope would be, and to space out the interior. I think people will ask that question unquestionably. And also, I think if we can all do some research, come up with some ideas, I mean, what can really
generate some buzz so that people will be excited about saving the building, rather than just, yes, it's an icon, everyone looks at it, but we're still talking about $1.5 million. People have to see some value in that. Okay.
Well, I know important part of the CPC application is a vote from the sponsoring entity.
So,
Okay, can we, so, I don't know if this goes counter to what you were thinking, Archie, but is there a reason that there couldn't be two different CPC?
I guess we have to make two completely
Maybe it's
separate
impractical.
applications.
Perhaps that's impractical.
I think that's
but,
tough,
I
yeah.
don't know that it's that impractical, because I think that you guys can provide me that number of kind of the exterior only, and, you know, it's cutting and pasting does wonders.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
which
right.
is, to be clear, I'd be cutting and pasting my own work from one document to another, so it's not plagiarism. But most of the proposal would be substantially identical. It's the number.
That's true, yeah,
You know,
okay.
so it really, that wouldn't be, I mean, the other option would be to put in the full amount and in the narrative talk about there's a scenario that the selectmen have discussed, which, you know, would just do the exterior.
Yeah.
But that really, again, because I haven't been through this particular CPC process, I've been through it in other towns, so it's different. In this particular process, it does seem that they're looking for things kind of all tied up. And so if we submit something that says, well, it's 1.5.
We're gonna say, which one do you really want? Yeah.
Right. And I think part of what we're saying is that that's ultimately a decision the voters will make. It's their money. So I think whether that's two separate proposals or one proposal with a full scope with an explicit acknowledgement that the CPC could recommend something less than that. I'd welcome any input from anyone who's been through this West Newbury CPC process in terms of which of those would be favorable.
I don't think there's been a situation where we had two
Complementary.
yeah.
Sequential even.
Yeah.
I like the idea of having a single proposal that includes the whole thing, and then to explicitly state that if the town chose to do just the exterior, that it would be.
So the CPC application would be for the entire job, but we could then break that down into two pieces for a town meeting, into two articles. Can we do that? I don't know if we can or not.
Let's think that through. So, I don't see why not, yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's really entirely a function of.
It's easier to do a couple of warrant articles. Yeah.
Question, you can do it.
That's easier than to, I think, give the CPC two different proposals, and then we can create different warrant articles. That's simpler to do.
So are you thinking two applications, one for the, in general terms, the exterior, and one for the.
No, one application, but then if they approve doing it, then we can create two warrant articles though. For one for a lesser amount if they approve the whole thing. What, two, but yeah.
So, just so I get this straight, because we'll be actually asked to.
Right.
Work this up. So, comprehensive approach, comprehensive scope and budget, but a warrant article that focuses on the exterior preservation. first phase?
With the, no, one warrant article that focuses on the exterior and one that is for the entire project, giving the voters a chance to look at it in two different ways. And because they will ask that, and if we don't have a concrete figure to answer to that, then I'm not sure they're going to like that.
Yeah, let me just reverse what I kind of thought was an approach is, here's the whole project, and we are focusing as this first step on the exterior preservation.
Right.
So we're together on that, that's great. The other question would be though, if I understand the process with CPC and going to town meeting, this goes before the Community Preservation Committee, they mull this over, they work it through, they're listening to your recommendation, but they in turn are making their recommendation to the town meeting. Is that not the way that works? So do they have a direct role in the drafting of the warrant, or do they have a direct role in drafting the warrant article? That's my question.
In my observation, it's been a collaborative process, the language, the selectmen set the language, but they wouldn't set something for a CPC article if the article language wasn't satisfactory to CPC.
What would be wrong with, what would be wrong with writing the warrant article for the entire amount and identifying the interior and exterior options? So, I mean, once you're, and KC can attest to this, once it's a warrant for $1.6 million, people can say, no, we only want to spend $700,000. And so they've still got the whole package in front of them, but they have the option of voting for a lesser amount that.
But that's what I'm driving at.
Instead of two separate.
But we have to be able, we can't at town meeting be thinking, well, I think we should only fix 7 windows, I think we should fix 9 windows. We'll be there forever. We have to give them, if we want to be able to do that, we have to be able to give them something that this is, the immediate need number. It would, people would argue, well, fixing the chimney is important, but it's, someone else said it isn't. We can't get into that.
If we did it that way too, we'd have to have, you'd have to have sort of a preset friendly amendment, I guess.
It's not friendly, it's unfriendly.
Yeah, well.
You're the boss. I'm the boss. It worries me, one thing, I've been sitting here listening to these options, and one thing that worries me a little bit is that all the different scenarios you come up with, we can make work. That's not a problem. Yeah. But if we give them an option, okay, here's the 1.5 million is the whole project. 700,000 is just the exterior. And they choose the 700,000 option. There's no guarantee that they'll come back in the spring and go along with the interior option. So the possibility then remains that you've got a shell that looks nice and you can't use it for anything because at the next town meeting it just went down in flames. So I think it's important to emphasize that it is a whole project. It's not just making the building look nice. It's a whole process. I would myself, I think, I'm just listening to everybody, rather go with the bonding idea to spread it out over some time so that it's not just a $1.5 million deplete the account kind of thing, but is an ongoing project. I mean, we do need some debt service, and that's a perfectly viable project. So, I mean, people do accept projects that are funded, that are bonded. But to do it in the two-stage thing, I think is taking a little bit of a risk. Or, you know, the either or, either do the whole thing or do the outside is a little risky.
It's a 20-year project. I mean,
Yeah.
we're doing this for the last 30 years probably. You know, 20-year bond might be.
Yeah, it might be more palatable. And since we get that much money every year from the state anyway, we're gonna replenish as we go along.
It's like, what, $155,000 a year for 20 years?
Probably less, we're working on, you know, financing for the water projects, and for 1.1 million, we're looking at 2.5% over 20 years.
That was about
That service about
70 or 80, yeah.
About
So for, you know,
100,000 a year.
yeah, I think 100, 110 is probably what you're talking about.
All coming out of CPA.
Well, yes, but it would be general obligation bonds, so the town issuing the debt, it's committing, you know, full faith and credit.
The town's guaranteeing.
Right, so if CPC.
So does CPC have to vote on that every year, or how does that work?
I haven't been through it, I would think they would have to.
I would think so, yeah.
And then town meeting would also have to vote on it every year.
Oh, this is just old.
We treat it, in my town where we have them on several occasions, and you might have done them on open space, we do vote it every year, just so everybody is reminded of what they've obligated. But I would say it's pro forma.
Well, the choice is either the CPC or your tax base.
Right, and they're much happier to do CPC, I can
Right,
say.
I'm sure.
It's gonna cost you money to do it.
But to me, I will tell you what, as your preservation architect, if you were able to do this, this would be the best of all possible worlds, because you would actually take advantage of low interest rates, a combined project, and addressing critical preservation work, as well as offering the space that will be, you know, usable space. I'm making the argument that from this room, from the community, come forward with ideas that will activate it. But we are creating a useful, I use the word vessel, but we're creating a place for this to take place. Other communities have actually shown the way, and I think you're wise to look at comparables.
Well, I don't know if we're going to agree with just the two of us here, but I think we should, the proposal to the CPC should be for the whole thing, and then work on the details after it gets to them.
We could even do a combination of money from the CPA and bonding as well, correct? When it comes down to actually figuring out financing it.
Are you saying bonding to be paid from the tax base, or?
Or from CPC later. I mean, we could pay, that's okay. Let's not go into the weeds right now. Let's not go into the weeds.
Yeah, you say, take some money out of free cash, we'll pay.
250 down and 36 months.
There you go.
And some people, who's gonna warranty? They're gonna warranty. Free oil changes.
So, Archie, was that a motion?
Yes,
I'll second it.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I've got my marching orders, I will, put this together over the course of the next few days. Once I have something, I'll, send it to the board and, post it to the town website, no later than Friday afternoon, evening, hopefully sooner, once that happens, I'll obviously let the Carpost Building Committee know, and they can help get the word out for people who want to review the specifics of the application, and then that will be reviewed at the CPC meeting a week from Thursday, September 19th at 7:30 p.m.
Could you just repeat the final motion, because you were going back and forth?
What I have is that the CPC proposal would be for the whole thing, with the details to be worked out over subsequent process.
would we be able to, know whether the financing arrangement could we find that out before town meeting, or
We
no?
can find that out this week.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, in general terms, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I talked to the financial advisor, with the water stuff.
So you could just sort of ask them
Yeah.
in general, okay, yeah, all right. So it's in anticipation of CPA money, is that's how it,
Yeah, I mean, part of what I'm wondering about is in terms of the request to CPA, because I would think it would be a separate warrant article to authorize the incurrence of debt, would clearly be something different than the CPC.
right.
So in terms of the request to CPC.
The debt would have to be for the whole amount,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of the request to CPC, would we be requesting that they vote to authorize a certain amount of money based on debt service, or are we asking them to earmark the full amount? I don't know those.
I would think they'd want to know the whole amount, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, certainly the town would be pledging to pay the whole amount.
Yeah, can they even, can the CPC, for.
They can't vote for something that's gonna happen 12 years from now, no.
They can't guarantee what's
No.
gonna happen, so.
The state might do away with the program. I mean, we'd still have our part, but there might not be any state funding, or there might be more, but
Right.
we don't know. Okay. Thank you all. There was a lot of good discussion, and think big ideas. Or small.
Creativity is a good thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
What else is there? What other applications have the CPC? What's your designation? So people can say, well, this makes sense, or it doesn't make any sense. Other
Yes.
The problem with that is we only know what we know at this point in time.
Yeah, but they
and-
can say,
right,
you
right.
can say there were no other applications, or there's two applications.
Yeah.
And the bonding is, the bonding is. The bonding is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll send you the link with Bob James. That looked at, more words than there were, yeah.
But the bonding is a good idea too.
Yeah.
And that's a great, that's the whole thing, at home saying. I like that. Who cares? I'm not good. Yeah, we should have had, December town meeting worked out well. Keep it quick. Well, Ron, I
I'd rather, right, but if we're asking for $100,000.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for the effort. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Good, good, perfect, thanks. Yeah,
This is very
yeah,
helpful.
yeah, thank you.
I mean, thank you, you came to the pre-show, we're the selectmen, but we've been in this room.
Well, yeah.
You can come in next time, probably.
But, you know, I will say, having come long discussions, the last part of it, going into the whole thing, yeah, that can take off, that's extremely fast.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the water.
Yeah.
But that's easy to see, you have to think about how they spread out their $400,000.
Could be. Yeah, I think that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of nuance.
Thank you. Little things for 12, 15, 35, 13.
Well, we'll be out.
Thank you.
Yeah, not that early to never. No.
Do you wanna put it on the calendar?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's no problem, but,
I grab it on now, but you're done, right? Yeah. So
Yeah,
we're
like, you know, Thursday, Friday would probably be